The sun was barely up when Roy McAllister heard the knock at his door. He was halfway through his morning coffee, boots propped on the porch rail, when the sound came again. Soft, hesitant, not the kind of knock a man makes. He set his mug down and opened the door to find a woman and a little boy standing on his stoop, dust on their boots and hope in their eyes. The woman wore a plain calico dress, her hair pulled back in a neat braid. She looked tired, but there was a stubborn set to her jaw. The boy, no more than 6, clung to her skirt, his eyes wide and curious. "Morning," Roy said, his voice gruff from disuse. "Can I help you?" The woman offered a tentative smile. "I'm Josie Lane. This is my son, Sammy. We're looking for work. Anything, really. We can cook, clean, help with the animals. We just need a place to stay for a while." Roy studied them, his heart softening despite himself. He'd lived alone since his brother passed, the ranch too big and too quiet for one man. He saw the way Josie kept her chin up, the way Sammy peeked around her skirts, and something inside him shifted. "I don't have much, but I could use a hand in the kitchen," he said, stepping aside. "And the barn could use a good sweeping." Josie's relief was plain. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister. We won't be any trouble," he grunted, but there was a smile in his eyes. "Call me Roy." They settled in quickly. Josie set to work in the kitchen, her biscuits light and her stew hearty. Sammy followed Roy everywhere, asking questions about the horses, the chickens, the old windmill that creaked in the afternoon breeze. Roy found himself answering, showing the boy how to feed the calves, how to mend a fence, how to whistle for the dog. At first, Roy kept his distance, not wanting to get too attached. But Josie's laughter filled the house, and Sammy's drawings, crude sketches of cows and cowboys, began to appear on the kitchen table. The place felt alive again, the silence broken by the sounds of family. One afternoon, as Roy and Sammy fixed a broken gate, Josie came out with lemonade and cookies. She watched them for a moment, her eyes soft. "You're good with him," she said quietly. Roy shrugged, embarrassed. "Never had kids of my own. Guess I'm learning as I go." Josie smiled, her gratitude shining. "You're doing just fine." That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. Sammy curled up in Josie's lap, his eyelids drooping. Roy listened to the crickets and the soft murmur of Josie's voice as she told her son a bedtime story. When Sammy was asleep, Josie turned to Roy. "Thank you for giving us a chance. Most folks just see a widow and a boy and turn us away." Roy looked at her, his voice gentle. "Everyone deserves a second chance, even an old fool like me." Josie reached over, her hand covering his. "You're not a fool, Roy. You're the kindest man I've met in a long time." He squeezed her hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of hope. As the stars blinked to life above the prairie, Roy realized that sometimes family isn't something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you build, one small kindness at a time. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. Josie rose early to bake bread and sweep the porch, her humming drifting through the house. Sammy's laughter echoed in the barn as he chased the chickens or tried, usually unsuccessfully, to help Roy with the milking. Roy found himself smiling more, the old ache in his chest easing with every sunrise. One morning, as Roy saddled his horse for a ride to town, he found Sammy waiting by the gate, clutching a battered tin lunchbox. "Can I come with you, Mr. Roy?" the boy asked, eyes shining with hope. Roy hesitated, unused to company on his errands, but Sammy's eagerness was impossible to resist. "All right, partner, but you'll have to help me carry the feed." Sammy grinned, running to tell his mother. Josie watched them go, her heart full and a little anxious. She trusted Roy, but letting her son out of her sight was still new. In town, Roy introduced Sammy to the shopkeeper, the blacksmith, and even the grumpy old postmaster. Sammy soaked up every word, asking questions about everything from horseshoes to telegrams. Roy realized how much he'd missed sharing the world with someone, how much he'd missed being needed. Back at the ranch, Josie took advantage of the quiet to sit on the porch and sew. She watched the wind ripple through the grass, the sky so wide it made her feel small and safe at the same time. For the first time since her husband's death, she let herself imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving. When Roy and Sammy returned, dusty and triumphant, Josie met them at the door. "Did you behave?" she teased, ruffling Sammy's hair. "He was a perfect gentleman," Roy said, winking at the boy. "Helped me carry the feed and even got a peppermint from Mrs. Wilkins." That night, after supper, Josie found Roy in the barn, mending a harness by lantern light. She sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For today. For everything." Roy shrugged, not trusting himself to speak. He'd never been good with words, but Josie seemed to understand anyway. She looked at him, her eyes serious. "I know we can't stay forever. I know you didn't ask for this. But you've given us more than a roof. You've given us hope." Roy set down the harness, meeting her gaze. "You and Sammy, you belong here as much as I do. This place was too quiet before. Now it feels like home again." Josie smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're a good man, Roy." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You're a good woman, Josie. And Sammy's a fine boy. I'd be proud to have you both stay as long as you want." The days grew longer, the grass greener. Josie planted a small garden behind the house, her laughter mingling with Sammy's as they worked side by side. Roy taught Sammy to ride, the boys' shouts of joy echoing across the fields. At night, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars and sharing stories. One evening, as a summer storm rolled in, Josie and Roy stood at the window, watching the rain dance on the roof. Sammy slept soundly in the next room, his dreams peaceful for the first time in months. Josie leaned against Roy, her voice soft. "I never thought we'd find a place to belong again." Roy wrapped his arm around her, his heart full. "Sometimes the family you find is the one you need most." Doubters. As the storm passed and the world grew quiet, Josie knew she and Sammy had finally come home, not just to a house, but to a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. Summer deepened, and the ranch flourished. Josie's garden bloomed with tomatoes and beans, and Roy's cattle grew fat on the sweet prairie grass. The days were busy, but the work felt lighter with 3 pairs of hands and 3 hearts sharing the load. Evenings were spent on the porch, where Josie's gentle singing and Roy's quiet laughter became the soundtrack of their new life. One Saturday, the Willow Creek Church announced a harvest picnic. Josie was nervous. She hadn't been to a social gathering since her husband's passing, and she worried what folks might say about her and Sammy living with Roy. But Roy insisted, "You're part of this community now. Let them see what I see." They arrived together, Josie in a blue dress she'd sewn herself, Sammy clutching a basket of her fresh bread. The townsfolk greeted them with smiles and curiosity. Some whispered, but most welcomed them, especially after tasting Josie's cooking and seeing how happy Sammy was. During the picnic, Sammy joined the other children in a game of tag, his laughter ringing out across the field. Josie watched, her heart swelling with gratitude. Roy stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You did this," she whispered. "You gave us a chance." Roy shook his head, his eyes warm. "We did this together." As the sun set, the preacher called everyone together for a prayer. He spoke of second chances, of kindness, and of the families we choose. Josie squeezed Roy's hand, tears shining in her eyes. That night, back at the ranch, Sammy fell asleep in Josie's lap, worn out from the day's excitement. Josie tucked him into bed, then joined Roy on the porch. The air was cool, the stars bright above. "I used to think our story was over," Josie said softly, "that all we had left was loss. But you showed me there's more, that we can start again." Roy took her hand, his voice steady. "You and Sammy brought this place back to life. I didn't know how much I needed you both until you showed up at my door." Josie smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Do you think we could stay? For good?" Roy turned to her, his eyes shining with hope. "I was hoping you'd ask." They sat together in the quiet, the future stretching out before them, uncertain, but full of promise. Josie knew there would be hard days, but she also knew they'd face them together, as a family. As autumn approached, Josie and Roy made plans for the ranch. They built a bigger chicken coop, planted more rows in the garden, and even talked about adding a room to the house. Sammy started school in town. His drawings now filled with horses and sunflowers and a house that looked just like theirs. On the first cold night of fall, Josie baked a pie and Roy read aloud by the fire. Sammy curled up at their feet. The house was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of laughter. And as the wind howled outside, Josie realized she was no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She had found her place, her people, and her peace. Roy looked at her, his eyes full of love. "Welcome home, Josie," she smiled, her heart overflowing. "It's good to be home." And so, in the heart of the prairie, three souls who had lost their way found each other and built a new life, one day, one kindness, and one hope at a time. Hit the like button and share if the story touched your heart. Join our Wild West family, subscribe now, and never miss a new story.